Well, today I'm in East Leroy at the Congregational Cemetery off of H Drive. And there's a Congregational church there in the background. Cemetery has a lot of very old graves here, a lot of new ones as well. A lot of family plots that go way back into the history of the county. So I'm going to explore some of that history today. So come along and join me. I first noticed the Congregational Cemetery when driving back from an appointment I had over in Scotts a few weeks ago. Although I did not know the name of it then, like many cemeteries, we often drive by them for years and never give them consideration. It was not until I started doing these videos, actually, on exploring history that I began to start looking for cemeteries. The cemetery is located on H Drive across from the Leroy Congregational Church. The church itself has a lot of history going back to the 1800s, as does the cemetery. According to Leroy Township records, the earliest burial date here is from 1832 with the grave of Marcia Bushnell, who died on April 12th of that year. It's believed that she's buried on land given to the church by her grandfather, Asa Bushnell, who died in 1844. These were among the earliest pioneers to arrive in Calhoun County. Congregational Cemetery is one of 4 cemeteries managed by Leroy Township. Let's visit the plot of perhaps the most prominent family in this cemetery, the Atwood family. There are over 6 generations of Atwoods buried in the cemetery, which consist of several dozen members of the family. One could perhaps dedicate an entire video to researching just those stories alone and still have missed a lot of them. Therefore, as with many large family plots, I've chosen to just feature a few members of that family. Ephraim and Samantha Atwood were early pioneers to Leroy Township. Ephraim was born in Potter County, Pennsylvania on October 28, 1838. He was the son of Benjamin and Abigail Oney Atwood, who had moved to the wilds of Michigan when Ephraim was just 6 years old in 1844. At that time, Marshall was the last terminal of the New York Central Railway. From there, they came by wagon to the community of Climax. From that time forward, the Atwoods were an important factor in building the community. Benjamin established a small village 7 miles south of Climax on Bear Creek, which included a general store, an ashery, a grist mill, and also a sawmill. Ephraim assisted in looking after these activities of the place as he grew up in this little pioneer village. The little hamlet his father had created no longer exists, and as per newspaper accounts of 1926, all evidence had passed into oblivion. During that time, however, it was known as the Lynn neighborhood. In later years, Benjamin Atwood established himself in Battle Creek and purchased an entire block on the south side of town, building a residence on South Jefferson Avenue known today as Capitol Avenue. At one time, there was a small street named after him called Atwood, which connected to West Fountain Street, but it no longer exists. Ephraim married Miss Samantha J. Holmes, a daughter of an Athens pioneer, and together they planned out a pretentious homestead, which they named Atwood, in what was then called West Leroy. The name Atwood was an Old English spelling of the family name because the Atwoods could trace their ancestry back to the time of Henry VIII, when their ancestors were keepers of the King's Forest a little way out of London. The great love of trees passed down to Ephraim, and he made his homestead a veritable treasury of trees, planting more than 25 different varieties on his property. Beautiful Atwood Wood became one of the show farms of southern Michigan. At one time, he also built a cottage in Battle Creek, which once stood on the corner of North Washington and Champion Street, across from the sanitarium, so that his children could attend school in the city. Samantha was born in Sherwood, 1841, and grew up in Athens, and she passed away in 1913 after a prolonged illness. She had written her own discourse in 1883 entitled Life and Death, which she requested be read at her funeral. It was read by her son, Fred Atwood.
Her discord read, "Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me die. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I lay down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me, when I lie where I long to be." Solo. To thee, O Mother Earth, we consign the sacred dust. From thee it hath evolved, to thee it must return, to mingle with the elements forever. Her funeral service was held at Atwood. She was 71 years old when she died. Ephraim, in later years, would travel the world on long trips with his daughter, Lena Atwood Ladd, who lived in Chicago. Together, they traveled to Europe and to the Far East, and many of their trips were spontaneous. In 1923, at the age of 85, he made a trip with her that covered 25,000 miles, where they traveled from the West Indies to Panama and all over South America. He died in 1926 after a bout with pneumonia while in Los Angeles, California. He was 88 years old. Reverend James Varney was a well-known congregational minister who served at the church directly across from where he is buried. He was born in Barnstaple, Devonshire, England on October 17, 1829. At the age of 21, he came to North America and first settled in Toronto, where he worked in the boot and shoe trade business for several years. He married Elizabeth Buckthought in Toronto. 2 years later, they moved to Richmond Hill, New York, where they lived 11 years. While carrying on the shoe trade business in that place, he felt a calling to the ministry and began serving at the Wesleyan Methodist Church as a local preacher. In 1867, he decided to dedicate himself wholly to the ministry, and with that purpose in mind, he moved to Michigan. He began in Fredonia in Calhoun County and the surrounding vicinity. He was eventually ordained in 1868. In 1873, he accepted a request to join the Congregational Church in East Leroy and become the pastor. He spent 7 years working as the pastor in this community and became a beloved member of the Leroy Township area. During his time with the church, he was largely instrumental in building a very substantial and beautiful house of worship. During that time, in 1878, he and his wife celebrated their silver wedding anniversary with a large celebration at their home in which many members of the community attended. In the spring of 1880, he received another request to become a pastor at a church in the town of Perry over in Shiawassee County and decided to accept the offer. He then served as a pastor for 2 churches in that area of Barry and Bancroft. For 3 years, he served both and eventually left them for yet another church in Vernon. In 1885, his health began to deteriorate, and the labor of the busy schedule of the ministry was too much for him, so he retired back to his home in Leroy Township. He had hoped taking a period of rest would restore his health, but he died of a heart attack in 1886. He was just 57 years old. His wife Elizabeth lived in the area until she died in 1895, and she is buried right next to him. Zachariah Meyer was born in Canton, Ohio, to Henry and Harriet Beck Mohler on April 12, 1865. He owned several farms in Leroy Township over the years and resided in the area over 54 years and was one of the most successful and prosperous farmers in Calhoun County, according to Washington Gardner. His family had come from Germany and settled in America in 1660 in the eastern U.S. Zachariah's father was born in Canton as well and worked as a coal miner. He was also a soldier in the 16th Ohio Volunteers and served in the Civil War for 2.5 years. When Zachariah was 20 years old, he came to Michigan in 1885 with just $3 in his pocket, which was his entire wealth at the time. He went to work on a farm, and in 1894, he bought his first farm, which was 127 acres. His farm was regarded as a model of convenience and modern improvement of its time. He also owned 2 houses in Battle Creek and was one of the most popular men in the community. He was a member of the school board for 9 years. He married Minnie Ephraim in 1890, the daughter of Joseph Ephraim, another German native living in the county, and together they would have 2 daughters. They were active members of the Congregational Church in Leroy Township. Minnie passed away in 1931 following heart trouble and a lingering illness. Zachariah passed away in 1955 at Lila Hospital after the only illness of his life at the age of 89. Sometimes when looking up details on someone who's buried in a cemetery, it's difficult to find much on that person. Such was the case with Nancy Bigelow, who died at the age of 85 in 1878. However, I wanted to include her in this video because the obituary on her, although brief, combined with the somewhat whimsical text on her grave marker, led me to believe that she was someone we would all wanted to have known. Her obituary reads, "She was one of the early settlers moving from Redfield near Detroit at quite an early day. She was an intelligent and good neighbor and possessed an unlimited ambition and vital energy and died full of years, her age being 85. Couldn't we all use someone in our life that is a good neighbor, intelligent, and with unlimited ambition and vital energy? That's what I thought. George Doubleday was a wealthy and successful farmer and resident of Leroy Township for many years. He had a life that ended tragically. In 1907, he had gone to Detroit to purchase a new automobile, which during that time period they referred to them as machines. It had been a pleasure trip, and he made the journey back to his home on a Monday morning. Apparently, he had been in ill health for several days, and after resting for an entire day after his trip, he arose the next morning. Saying nothing to his wife, he got out of bed, walked into another room, and returned with a pistol. His wife tried to convince him to put the gun down, but he refused and placed the revolver to his temple and pulled the trigger. He was dead before his wife reached his side, according to this article. He was survived not only by his wife, but 2 sons and a daughter. One of his sons, William, was born in 1870 in Branch County, who also continued on the tradition of being a farmer. His parents had moved from Branch County to Leroy Township when he was just 12 years old. He married Edith Lillian Radford in 1894, and in November 1944, together they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. Many generations of the Doubleday family would be in attendance at their celebration. Sadly, William would pass away 1 month later at the age of 74. Edith would continue to live in the area, being a regular member of the Pine Creek Club. She would pass away at the age of 77 in October of 1953. One of their sons was Duane Doubleday, who perhaps had one of the most interesting lives of them all. Feeling the call of duty at age 16, Donald Duane Doubleday, aka Timer as he was known, left the family farm after graduating Athens High School in 1944 to join the U.S. Maritime Service Merchant Marines. He trained in Sheepshead Bay, New York, and then crewed as a fireman and a gun crew on Liberty ships in the Pacific Theater. In 1945, Timer joined the U.S. Marine Corps and served with the military police in Tientsin, China, as part of the 1st Marine Division. He left the Marine Corps in 1959 for civilian life, but was recalled to duty for the Korean conflict. He rejoined the Marines on active duty from 1959 to 1962, when he entered civilian life again. He joined the Michigan Air National Guard as a USAF reservist. He returned again to active duty in 1964, this time with the U.S. Navy. He served on various ships, but most notably as a river rat in Vietnam. He finally retired from active duty for good in 1972 after 23 years of service. In civilian life, he worked for the Grand Trunk Railroad until his retirement in 1989. He passed away in October of 2021 at the age of 94. His headstone is emblazoned with all of the branches of service that he was a part of during his lifetime. I usually do not feature graves this recent in history, but Timer's story was too amazing to pass by, so I included it.
Well, that's going to conclude today's journey through history here in East Leroy at the Congregational Cemetery. It certainly was a fascinating tour through history here. If you liked today's video, please take a minute to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, share the video with others, and be sure to check out my podcast at Tales of Southwest Michigan's Past. And until next time, thanks for watching.